Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Pops.
And welcome to really the most exciting week of college football. We've all been counting down on October the 12th. Huge games this week after it's really just the absolute barn burner of upsets last week. Had multiple teams go down, namely of which was Alabama getting beat by Vanderbilt. You had Tennessee losing to Arkansas and a few other bigger games that happened. Miami, yet again, found a way to succeed. And it finds, I hate making this joke, but it seems like every time Miami escapes, Florida gets hurt by a hurricane. So I don't know what the correlation is. It's like they made a deal with the devil. But so me and Maul and Pops, we all talked last week and we decided to make a little bit of a change. So we had our top 12 teams based upon, what we view the top 12 teams in as, and what we really determined is we had no idea what we were talking about because everybody keeps losing. So what we decided to do is do it more like the college football playoff ranking system. These are the 12 best teams based upon the schedule, based upon their wins and their losses, trying to rack and stack who is going to make that top 12 based upon what we see today. So we'll go through that while at the same time really paying a lot of attention to these games. Pops has got his Texas Longhorns hoodie on, so I'm going to go with that because I know that's unchanged from last week. Is we all three had Texas as our number one team, and we all do this week going into it for the Red River Showdown. Who do you got? You got Texas or you got Oklahoma? And before you go, I want to pull out this trivia stat. So the last time that these teams, either team entered the matchup as the number one favorite, it's only happened twice in the history of the Red River that one of the teams was rated number one in the country. For Oklahoma, that was the latest to happen. And when they were ranked number one, Texas was 15 and Texas won. And then you have to go back to the 1800s, I believe, for when Texas was number one and Oklahoma was unranked, and it ended in a 15-15 tie. So it doesn't favor the history of the number one. However, I will say Vandy was 0-60 against top 5 teams, and they found a way. So eventually I like the old saying that statistics are meant to be broken. Usually when an announcer goes, hey, the kickers failed to miss this season, you're just setting them up to miss. No one's perfect over time, but what's your keys to the game?
Yeah, I think for me, looking at it right now, Texas is a 15-point spread, and I think that's too much. You just go into last season, everybody had high hopes for Texas. Quinn Ewers, this is going to be his breakout year after, Ellinger had left, and, we ended up seeing a Dylan Gabriel come in there with the Oklahoma team and just go tit for tat the whole entire game and end up winning. Obviously, last year there was a lot of offensive miscues on behalf of Texas that, it should have been not necessarily a blowout scenario, but they could have at least scored by a touchdown, if not more, had they executed on certain plays. So that's the thing. They're going to, the Cotton Bowl at the Texas State Fair. It's going to be a different environment, kind of more so neutral than it would be anything else. The keys to the game, obviously, for, the offense for Texas is just continue to move the ball. There's really big question mark. How's Quinn going to look coming back? And we just truly don't know, how it's going to be. Like, this is that drama that we talked about last week. Is there going to be any drama if Quinn looks terrible, about putting Arch back in and so on and so forth, and, all the repercussions for that. Now, on the flip side, I will say, OU is going to have, the solid defense, but are they going to be able to put up offensive numbers against a pretty tough defense? And, we saw it against Tennessee. They were only able to put up 15. So there's a lot of question marks lingering. Even against Houston, who is literally going down the toilet this season, they were only able to put up 16 points. So we've seen offensive miscues by Oklahoma this season. I think Texas is going to be able to win this game. I don't think it's by greater than 15, though, to say the least, just because of the nature of the game.
Based upon how bad Oklahoma's offense has been this season, the only chance that Oklahoma has is through their defense. They've got to keep it low scoring. I would say they need to hold Texas under 20 points to have a chance in the game, and that's asking for a lot. And then on the other side, for Texas, they really have to have the inability to stop the run.
Yeah.
Because that's what Oklahoma's going to do. They have a running quarterback who's young, who's made a lot of mistakes throwing the football. Texas, I expect to say, you're not going to do that today. Now, the crazy thing is we've seen this happen multiple times in this rivalry. It's chaotic. Last year, Texas had the game. They had it won, and they let Oklahoma win the game. Texas has found ways to lose games in the past, especially under Sarkisian. And just you look at his whole history of coaching, he's found ways to lose some games. And I will say that they found ways to win games last year. You look at them going in the Tuscaloosa, beating Bama. You look at this year, them going up to Michigan. I'm not trying to knock Texas off. I think Texas is going to win. I actually sort of like the 15 points just because of how poorly Oklahoma's offense looks. They don't look great. If I was going to give them any advantage, it'd be on the defensive side of the ball. But with all the weapons that Texas has, it really feels like the second that Texas gets up by 2 scores, the game it's going to be tough for Oklahoma to batter back. They've got to keep it a 1-score game the whole time.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing too. Like I go back to last season. It might have been Whittington or I think it was Whittington actually, or Worthy, wide open, right through their fingertips, dropped a touchdown. Steve Sarkisian, we had on like the 2-yard line, 1-yard line, ran it twice, couldn't get it into the end zone, even going on 4th down to try to get the touchdown. Like this is just one of those games where I feel like anything can go regardless of the records just because of the rivalry.
100%. Taking a look at the next, I want to expedite this because I think it's going to be the same. Your 2 through 5, are they any different than Maul's? Because Maul's got Ohio State 2, Oregon 3, Penn State 4, and Georgia 5, and that's exactly how I see it right now. Do you have any changes with that?
Yeah, I put UGA up above Oregon.
Okay. And Penn State, or what was your order?
Georgia, Oregon, Penn State.
Okay, so you have Georgia in at 3?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll hit Georgia here in a minute, but from the standpoint of who our number 2 has, Ohio State, this is their first big test, which I would say is also Oregon's first big test. Ohio State goes to Eugene, goes to Oregon. Right now, Ohio State's a 3-point favorite, both undefeated. It's the night game in Oregon. Huge implications, mainly from the standpoint of who is possibly going to get that first round bye and control their own destiny going forward in terms of the Big 12 playoff race. I sit back. Oregon has looked better on defense the past few weeks. I've liked what I've seen out of them. Offensively, they've still dropped too many passes. Their running back is just due to break one. It's like he will get through, and I think the longest run he's had this season is like 20-something yards is his longest. It's Ohio State's defense hasn't played anyone yet, and that's my question for both of these teams is I get that Ohio State, especially Jeremiah Smith, has looked ridiculous out there at wide receiver, but from a standpoint of who they played, nobody. And neither is Oregon. Oregon played Michigan State last week. You got a comparison victory between them and Ohio State. But from a standpoint of one of these teams has had a better test, absolutely not. Both teams have not played anyone. So we'll get to see which one of these teams is better than the other. But I would also argue that going forward, based upon neither one of these teams playing someone, I really don't know who this team is after this week, unless one team just comes out and if Oregon comes out and just absolutely smacks Ohio State, then I'd probably be like, okay, maybe this is the Oregon team that we thought. What are your sort of thoughts going in?
Yeah, I mean, we've got two transfer portal quarterbacks. Will Howard coming out of K State. Not really having success in the critical games that he needed to have in the Big 12. Same thing goes for Dylan Gabriel, two Big 12 quarterbacks. Playing for a different program, and I would say Gabriel's got the better stats, but also at the same time, if you look, just Michigan State game, Ohio State had to go there. Michigan State went to Oregon. Uh, Points differential, Ohio State won that. If you really wanted to get down to it, I think the better defense right now, even though Dan Lanning came from the Georgia tree, or Saban, did he come Saban tree or just Kirby tree?
Both.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And anyways, I think Ohio State's got the better defense. It's just going to be a matter of going into Oregon and playing. But like we said, this is a great test for both teams. I think Ohio State's going to win this game.
Yeah, I have a hard time picking Oregon just because of the inconsistencies at wide receiver.
And the last piece was we saw how close that Boise State game was. Don't get me wrong, Ashton Jonty's playing out of his mind, and it'd be tough for any team to stop him right now. But the caveat was they were an unranked opponent and almost pulled the upset.
And Judkinson on the other side for Ohio State, and they have another running back whose names I'm forgetting right now, but both of those tandems run the ball very, very well. I get that they haven't played anyone yet. Can Oregon, especially from the standpoint, I really like Oregon's defensive tackles. They play very well, but from the end perspective of keeping those guys contained, that's really where for Oregon the game is going to be won and lost on the defensive trenches. Is can they keep the edge contained? If they can do that, they have a great chance against Ohio State, man, because of what you said at the beginning. Will Howard has proven that in big games he has failed to be clutch. Will that show up again this year for Ohio State? Because the past few years, without a mobile running quarterback, they have really struggled in clutch games. When it came time to throw the rock and make those big time plays, they didn't get it last year out of McCord. Will they get it out of Howard this year? We'll find out. I'm going to jump before we get to Georgia. The other big game, Penn State, USC, it lost some of its luster after USC dropped that game to Minnesota, knocked them right out of the top 25. It's still a huge game for Penn State. You go on the road to USC, they've got to have this game, mainly from the standpoint of if we want to mention Penn State as being in the running for not just a playoff spot, but the Big Ten championship, they've got to be able to beat a Big Ten opponent in USC. USC's reeling. I look to this game and go, who's going to win? Penn State, because in 2 games against Big Ten play, the trenches for USC have looked awful. Yeah. Awful. They have been manhandled, especially on the offensive line front. They cannot get, you look at Wisconsin, they got blown out by Bama. Then they go Minnesota. Both of those teams had really good performances in the trenches against USC. I look at Penn State and I go, I'm sorry, USC, you guys are going to catch a third straight loss, because if you can't handle 2 lesser Big Ten opponents, then Penn State should have their way with USC.
Yeah, and the worst part about it is this is where Penn State starts to choke. They get up in the rankings, and whether they let it go to their head or whatever it may be, but this is typically where you see the decline of Penn State throughout the season. They start out strong, and now for the most part, it was always when they started, facing the Michigans and the Ohio States in November. Granted, we get what was supposed to be a good game here in October. I think it'll still be a test for them, but just like you said, I picked last week. I didn't pick that USC was going to lose, but I definitely picked that they were going to not cover against Minnesota, just purely based on how they have played against Big Ten teams up to this point. Like Michigan could have won. It was a 27-24 game. They've shown that the size up front is losing for them, and I mean, there's nothing you can do against the corn-fed boys from the Midwest. Playing against the guys from out west. I think Penn State still wins this game. 5.5. I could definitely see them taking it. and being able to cover for this upcoming week.
Then a dramatically different change. The poor Mississippi State Bulldogs begin on their path of misery as they catch pretty much every major program in the SEC that is vying for a playoff spot. And they started off this week with Georgia, who this is symbolic for two different reasons. One, all of us, it may have been different order, but have Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Georgia as our 5. And then after that, I guarantee you we're going to see things very differently after that, just with all the chaos. But Georgia goes to Mississippi State, Mississippi State goes to Georgia. Georgia's favored by 34. The only thing that I will sit back for Georgia is Georgia a good football team? Yes. Their biggest struggle right now, they cannot run the football. They can't. Georgia's bread and butter, when you look under Stetson Bennett and the back-to-back natties, one was defense. That was not to be understated. But two, you sort of look at who they had in the backfield. They were able to run the football very well. With Cook, with Zamir White, they had guys tandems that were able to run. A lot of people thought ETN coming in Florida was going to be sort of that plug and play, just really give them that boost that they needed. Has not shown up this week. I don't fear them, pulling Alabama against Vanderbilt just because of how bad Mississippi State's been playing. But Georgia's got to figure out the rushing attack if they want a chance, because they get Mississippi State, and then here right around the bend is Texas. So Georgia has a lot more that they have to prove this week in terms of getting ready for the Texas game. Texas has got to get through Oklahoma in order to get to the Georgia game. But what are your initial thoughts with Georgia sitting at number 5 before we sort of get into the teams of chaos for the rest of our teams in the top 12?
Yeah, I guess for the tune-up game of Auburn, they were able to put up 150 yards on the ground. So, I mean, not what you would expect. They don't have any 100-yard rushers yet. ETN had 90 yards. So, I do understand what you're saying, but also I still give the benefit of the doubt of, the mid-season, not necessarily sloppy play, but, not playing as hard every week, in the games that you don't necessarily have to. I know it is a liability. They lost to Bama. But I see Georgia showing up at the end of the year as a one-loss team.
So what we'll do after that is, we have a bunch of other games we're going to break down, and we will. I think what will be a little bit easier is let's go through our top 12, and I have Maul's list next to me, and we can go through it and sort of break it down from that standpoint, and then we can go into the other big games that involve these opponents this week. But at number 6, Maul has Miami at 6. Who do you got at number 6?
Clemson.
I have Clemson as well, just because Miami should have lost both games.
Agreed.
Now, mainly because I don't think you could overturn the call after it stood. It was clearly targeting against Miami, which would have gave
100%.
Cal the first down. They've been able to knee the ball out, run the clock out. Miami back-to-back week should be sitting at 2 losses. They're undefeated. It's one of those things where, do I think Miami's that good, or do I think they've gotten lucky? They've gotten lucky. Clemson, on the other hand, has been handing it to teams after the Georgia loss, which I would sit back. That was not a neutral site game. That was here in Atlanta. That's a home game for Georgia. That,
Checks.
to me, is where I sit back and I look at Clemson and I have to give them the edge. If you put them on a neutral field right now in the ACC championship, getting choked up thinking about conference championships, I'd give it to Clemson.
100%.
That's just where I'm at right now with them. Clemson this week, let me double check. They play Wake Forest -20. I'm not even really going to address that game because I don't see it happening. Who do you have in at number 7? At 7, this is where Maul has Clemson. Do you have Miami at 7, or do you have someone else?
That's where I have Miami.
I got a surprise one. I got Texas A&M. A&M's look good. And if I have one thing to say about A&M, it's that if there is a team that is going to shock some people, it will be A&M, because everyone's talking for Texas right now of the Georgia game. That's not the game of the year, in my opinion. As it's leading up to it right now, I think it's going to be at the end of the regular season with Texas and
versus
A&M.
A&M.
Dude, that one to me, that's the one that if I was a Texas fan, I'd be like, that's the game that scares me the most because everyone is going to get up for Georgia, but Texas A&M is going to have this slow build to get to that game. And you sit back and you look at Texas. So Texas right now, excuse me, pulling up their schedule, got the Red River this weekend, then Georgia, then a tricky game at Vandy. As much as who would have thought I would have been saying that to begin the college football season, versus Florida, at Arkansas, versus Kentucky, and then at A&M to end it all. And the reason I say it's more of a tricky game for A&M, and the reason I have A&M ranked where they're at, you look at the rest of their schedule. Mississippi State next week versus LSU, which is really their biggest test outside of Texas. Then they go to South Carolina versus New Mexico State, at Auburn and Texas. They haven't lost an SEC game.
Yeah.
Like, they could easily be playing Texas with the SEC championship and really a playoff bid on the line at the end of the season. I like Texas A&M's defense. They have looked dominant every game this season. They've really played well. It's really what they did against Mizzou was unheard of if their offense plays like that each and every week.
Good luck.
They're a dangerous team, super dangerous team. That's just why I had them in at number 7. But you guys had Miami. Miami this week, I think, is on a bye. They are. They're not playing this week.
Yeah, they play Louisville next week.
So bigger game for them, even though Louisville has dropped 2 in a row now. So it takes a little luster out of it. So then at number 8, Maul's got BYU. Who do you got at 8?
I've got Bama.
I've got Miami at 8. This is where Miami came in for me. You've got Bama at 8. I'll be real honest with you. Maul's got them right now at 12.
Yeah.
I don't got them in the top 14. Here's why. Bama dropped to 7 in the AP poll, which I think is generous. That was a mercy, not dropping them farther.
Yeah.
This is not to take anything away from Vanderbilt. And I'll lead in with this. Vanderbilt, it wasn't that Bama lost the game. Vanderbilt won that game. Bama could not stop Vanderbilt all day long. Could not stop them. And Vanderbilt really didn't do anything outside of sort of a veer option. Bringing a tight end across the formation, faking it to a running back, hitting the dude in the flat. You could sum up Vanderbilt's playbook with about 10 plays, but they did them exceptionally well, and Bama had zero answer. You go to the second half against Georgia, Bama had zero answers on defense. I sit back and I go, so what you're telling me is Joe Klatt said it about Bama, which is, it's true. Bama fans may not want to hear it, but they resemble a Big 12 team. That your defense is incapable of stopping anyone right now, so your only hope is outscoring them. Yeah. And the second that your offense can't get on the same sheet of music, you're going to be in a close game. And that's what happened with that team. Throw a pick 6. They had multiple 3-and-outs, had a fumble when, you get the game within 5, you hold them to a field goal, you're sort of sitting back, this is going to be the first time you take the lead, we're going to go down here and win. You fumble in the 4th, they drive right down, make it a 12-point game. The rest is sort of in the history books. Bama could not figure it out. And that, for me, is why they're not in my top 14, because until they prove defensively, like I sit back, they get South Carolina at home, they need to be thanking the football gods they're not on the road in South Carolina, because that would change the game. It's a 12 o'clock game against South Carolina. Right now, Bama's a 21-point favorite. Give me South Carolina all day with the points. Because until Bama proves that their defense can show up and play, you can forget it. Because sorry, I'm going to go on my Bama rant here now. Did I think we were going to have regression from going Saban to DeBoer?
100%.
Yes, 100%. No one's going to argue that. Did I think we were going to lose to Vanderbilt the first year after? No. Like, this to me is it's one of those things where I want to praise Saban for always having guys prepared. That I don't care. And he talked about all the time. It's like, I don't care who we're playing. This team is going to give you their best shot. If you think that you are going to walk in and that A is going to win you a game, you're dead. You have to perform. They did not do that. And I sit back and I look at it and I go, they had every reason to perform after almost losing the game to Georgia. Like all the different lessons that we talked about after that win, that I was sitting back and go, hey, they need to make some serious changes. Like, I'm glad the game ended like this. You would have thought those lessons would have been instilled into the players and they would have came out with some motivation. Didn't see it. So that's why I'm hesitant on Bama. You got them higher. What are your thoughts of just having Bama higher?
I mean, just in general, we talked about how do we think the CFP would vote these guys in, and I think it comes back to the whole, discussion that we always have of who's in, who's out, who's going to make us the most money. I don't see, a CFP with a 12-man spread, or 12-team spread, and Alabama not being in it on a one loss like that. That's kind of where I'm at. Do I think that they are worse than some of these teams? Yeah, I agree. But I think at the end of the day, a one-loss Alabama would have it easier than maybe a two-loss Michigan or a two-loss USC. If they're able to bounce back, that's type of my interpretation of how we thought the CFP would vote this.
The thing that helps Bama in the CFP is Notre Dame's loss to NIU.
Yeah.
Because Notre Dame lost at home as 28-point favorites against NIU. If Notre Dame wins out, I would argue Notre Dame's going to be in. Which, if Bama wins out and they only have one loss to Vandy, you're going to put them in. So I agree with you from that standpoint. I think my bias is I don't see Bama only having one loss based upon how they played the past 6 quarters of football.
Well, next week we get that, against Tennessee.
Yeah. Which Tennessee is, I guess we can go through the rest of the matchups since we got the Bama rant out of the way. Maul had BYU at 8, and I'll just go through the rest of his top 14. So BYU at 8, Ohio State number 9, Boise State number 10, or excuse me, I don't know if I said it. Iowa State at number 9, excuse me, Boise State at 10, Kansas State at 11, Alabama at 12, SMU at 13, A&M at 14. Starting with your number 8, who do you have going the rest of the way down?
I had Iowa State. I had BYU, Boise State, and then Ole Miss. And then 13 and 14 is going to be decided next weekend between LSU and A&M.
For me, I had at 8, I had Miami. Then I had Iowa State at number 9. I threw Notre Dame in at 10. They have a win against A&M, and they have a win against Louisville. Yes, they have a horrific loss against NIU, but from a committee standpoint, I think that they're going to look at those 2 wins because BYU really doesn't have, in my opinion, a amazing win. The Texas A&M win looks better and better each week for Notre Dame. Yes, BYU's undefeated, but when you look at their out-of-conference play, they're not going to play anybody. They don't.
I mean, they blew out Kansas State. I mean, but that's going to be it.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's inside their own division. Is they don't have an out-of-conference win like Notre Dame's going to carry for the rest of the year with A&M. That's the only reason I got Notre Dame ahead of BYU, because BYU comes in at 11 for me, then Boise State, and then I have Tennessee and Ole Miss rounding out 13 and 14. Excuse me. Yeah, sneeze. Sitting here thinking about these. In what this is exactly what we were talking about. After the top 5, dude, it is absolute chaos.
Yeah.
Chaos of how you're going to start ranking teams. Will it get more and more, I don't want to say clear, but a little bit more definable? But it's going to go to what I said to you guys last week. I really think that this is going to be, are we going to harp on the bigger wins? Yes. And I can see maybe I should have put Bama in the top 12 just because when I look at all these teams, who's got the best win? Bama versus Georgia.
Yep.
The problem is I would say Alabama, outside of Notre Dame, has the worst loss to Vanderbilt. It's inexcusable. You can't sit back and overlook that. How do they judge losses?
Yeah.
How are we going to view things? Because at the end of the day, someone from Ohio State, Oregon is going to lose. But you look at Texas and Georgia, someone's going to lose that game. Who lose? Do you leave a 2-loss Georgia out over a 1-loss Alabama? Because Georgia got beat by Bama and beat by Texas, do you leave them out even though Bama lost to Vanderbilt? You know, and these are the type of like games that the committee is going to be debating at the end of the season that I sit back and I go, if you thought that it was going to get less complicated, then it's going to get wild
Well,
for those last few spots.
and here's the thing that makes me nervous as a Texas fan. This early in the season, regardless of what happens this week, let's say we win, going into next week. All right, I truly believe next week Georgia's going to win. I do. I just think it's going to be the first test that Texas truly has outside of this game this weekend. And so I see Texas losing to Georgia. So now they've got one loss. So now we got Georgia and Texas, each with a loss. But then Texas has to go play Vandy, who beat Alabama. They got to play Kentucky, who beat Florida. And then they got to play Arkansas, who beat Tennessee. So I still think that, like we're trying to allude here, if Texas goes down and then gets another loss to one of those teams, like it's going to create absolute chaos that, we've said, since you guys were on the show last year, like only expanding this is going to make it so much more convoluted on how the CFP is going to judge this because we know they're not watching all the games.
Never have truer words been said than that statement right there. I know how much I watch football games, and I know that the head of the committee, like, I don't see them at games. You never see, like, hey, there's the head of the committee at this big game. He's watching the game now. Like, you don't see that. Like, who knows what these guys are doing on the week? And most of them are athletic directors, like, of their own school. You really think that Ohio State's athletic director is watching,
Penn
Ole
State.
Miss battle LSU or Penn State battle USC before watching his game? No. Like, in this idea, and that's why what you're alluding to is, I think, the bigger point of emphasis, which is Bama losing in early October to Vanderbilt helps them if they win out.
Yes.
Because if you win out, as long as you don't have a late loss, it's tended to be forgiven because you improved. What kills teams, the latest loss is the one that always sticks out in people's minds. Is just like you're saying, if Texas loses to Georgia, then that's the bigger story because that's what happened latest. And if they went down and they lost to A&M the last week of the season, if you had them sitting with 2 losses, let's say Georgia is sitting with 1 loss, let's say Ole Miss is sitting with 2 losses, Bama's sitting with 2 losses, Tennessee's sitting 2 losses. How do you grade these teams then with 2 losses? What they're going to do, they're going to look at the latest loss. Texas may get bumped out because they lost to A&M. Like, that's just the way that it is. Is that right? Absolutely not. But you're onto it with that standpoint of it's far better if you're going to drop one to do it early in the season, do it later because the committee seems to smash teams if they lose one late.
Exactly.
Which now that we got both of our outlines, taking a look at the other big games. So we talked about Bama, South Carolina, Texas, Oklahoma, Penn State, USC. The next big one, which I think is a sneaky matchup, is Arizona, BYU. We each had them. BYU, per the AP poll, is at 14. BYU is a 4.5-point favorite. Don't call me crazy to watch Arizona win this game. Arizona has a good offense, and Arizona is this type of team that a few weeks ago they went in and they upset Utah. Like, I just sit back and I look at Arizona and I go, I get that they got smacked by Kansas State and they lost last week to Texas Tech. Going into Provo to play BYU is going to be more difficult, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Arizona win the game. Initial thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is we truly don't understand to a full extent of who these teams are. Now, if you looked at the common denominator of who they've played, Kansas State. Kansas State blows out Arizona. But I watched that game. That offense could not get anything going to save their lives against Kansas State. And, that's been pretty much their bread and butter since the beginning of the season. Now, BYU, on the other hand, I mean, these guys are just blowing people out of the water outside of the SMU game. But let's be honest, we know that SMU has one heck of an offense as well. So Overall, I can see this being an absolute shootout, Big 12 style, and it's really about who has the ball last, or who makes the least amount of mistakes. Really, in all reality, is who turns the ball over less, who punts less. And they're just going to go back and forth this whole entire game.
Next big game, SEC matchup. We have a bunch of them late in the evening. First one that starts 30 minutes before the Ohio State Oregon game is Florida going to Tennessee. Yes, I don't really think Florida has a good chance, but this is just one of these like games that Tennessee, you sit back, you look at the last 2 weeks. They got handled. They did not have an answer offensively for what Arkansas was doing.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the first time that, really a freshman quarterback in terms of how many games he's played, I know he's a sophomore, has looked. He looked bad. Like they were struggling with throws. Defensively, what blew my mind is at the end of the game when number 10 went out, it was like we knew that the quarterback couldn't throw, and y'all let them run right down the field and score to take the lead, which I get at Arkansas. It's a loud stadium. Those fans are passionate. I sit back and I look at this. I think Tennessee comes out with the victory. They're minus 15.5, but I wouldn't be surprised to watch Florida keep it closer than minus 15. Florida hasn't played bad football here lately. I get they haven't played anyone super tough, but it wouldn't surprise me with Tennessee on the edge of having to play Bama next week to possibly overlook Florida.
Yeah.
So that would be my scare for Tennessee. The only thing that's good for Tennessee is they dropped the game against Arkansas, so that may have rattled them enough to get prepared for it. But do you see an outcome in which Florida wins the game?
I think I don't see an outcome where Florida wins it. No, I think we have the standard of the SEC, matchup of anything can happen, type caliber. I mean, we all know that Billy Napier is about to get fired, at the end of the season, if not before that, if they continue to trend towards 500 or worse. But let's be honest. So this is where you always argue about how silly the AP rankings are to begin a season. Because you look at Tennessee, week 2, they're like, hey, this matchup against North Carolina State's really going to tell us who these teams are. And guess what? Tennessee blew them out 51-10. And so we're like, all right, Tennessee's this dog. They're top 10. Like, put them all the way to the top. And so they're riding that high. And then they go play Oklahoma that doesn't have an offense, and they only win by 10 points. And then next week after that, they go play Arkansas on the road and lose. So it's like, were we disguising something this whole entire time just based off of these made up rankings? And Tennessee's really just a mid team that deserves to be, in the tens to the teens, in the rankings.
It showed up that a defensive game plan against a young quarterback has really given them fits.
Mm-hmm.
For as much as Tennessee likes to spread you out, and they tried, I will say that my man missed a bunch of throws. It was clear that though Sue Piggy was rattling that young man in Arkansas, which I understand. It's a difficult environment, especially if you were just like an NFL fan. Until you go watch a college game, and I'm not saying you can't go to like a noon kickoff game. You may get a taste of it, but if you want prime example, next game, Ole Miss going to LSU, you want a game that's going to make you go, oh my gosh, you people are crazy. Go that game. You'll smell the bourbon in the air from New Orleans, from Baton Rouge. Like that game will be chaos, absolute chaos, because it means so much. Like people don't understand how different an environment it is in college for a big game as compared to the pros. Pros, half the people don't even cheer. They just sit there. Like I'm honestly surprised that some of them even go to the games. It's more of a spectator sport than it is sort of a cult following.
And bro, I mean, I'll be honest. Like we talked about it, when we used to work together. Like we go to a Mississippi State game, your ears are ringing for the next 3 days because of them dang cowbells. They've been mid since Dak left, and you still go to a game and you just like you have such a headache from those dang cowbells that just sticks with you for days on end.
Yeah, heads up. If you ever go to a Mississippi State game, learn the lesson I learned.
Wear
Bring
earplugs.
earplugs. You may not hear your friends, but you'll at least hear them on the drive home. Because if you don't, like Pop said, dude, your ears won't stop ringing. So, getting back to the Ole Miss LSU game, this one is sort of, in my opinion, the best game of the weekend.
Yes.
And it's because Ohio State and Oregon can afford a loss to one another. They have the rest of the schedule. But you look at going from a one-loss SEC school to a two-loss with the remaining schedule for both teams. LSU's got to play A&M. LSU has to play Alabama. LSU, let's see, who else do they have on their schedule? Then I'm sitting back. I know Ole Miss, they can get, if they can get through LSU, it primes them up for getting Georgia at the SIP. But LSU, after Ole Miss, goes to Arkansas for a night game, at A&M versus Bama, at Florida versus Vandy versus Oklahoma. Goodness, that's a tough schedule. No doubt about it. And then you look at Ole Miss, after going to LSU, they get Oklahoma at home, at Arkansas versus Georgia at home, at Florida, and then the Egg Bowl, which I get Mississippi State's terrible, but it's like the Iron Bowl. I don't care how bad either team is. They hate one another.
Yeah.
Like, you never know what you're going to get. Ole Miss has more promise because of how they've played against South Carolina, out South Carolina. That looked good for them. My only question is for LSU is I don't know who LSU is. And I say that because they lose to USC, but then you look at the rest of their schedule. It's like versus Nichols. Did they handle their business? Yeah, but they gave up 21 points at South Carolina. Could have lost that game 136-33. Versus UCLA. We know UCLA is terrible. They still gave up 17 points. And for a little bit, we're trailing in that game. It was close up until the second half.
Yep.
Then they play South Alabama. They win 42-10. But I sit back and I go, this is sort of outside the USC game. This is really the big test for LSU. And I don't know who they are. Like, it's clear that with Nussmeier, they're not Jaden Daniels. They don't have that type of offense. Their defense, Perkins, is out for the rest of the year. I don't know how I feel about this game. What are your initial vibes?
Yeah, so I think obviously based on what we're seeing, LSU doesn't have the defense, thinking Patrick Queen type level guy in the middle. They just don't have, the DBU type feel to this team. And looking at them, they're a pass-only offense. It seems like Brian Kelly is still living off of last year, thinking that Nussmeier can do the same things Jane Daniels can, and he just can't. Their running back doesn't even have 300 yards, and, we're 5 games into the season. I'm sorry, but, you've got to get some balance on that, on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, giving up this many points, especially going in against Ole Miss, I think they're going to have their work cut out for them because, we know outside of the possible overlook of Kentucky, we'll see after we get a couple more games for evidence. Ole Miss knows how to score. Jackson Dart knows how to throw a football and play some ball in that Lane Kiffin offense. And I think this week we're going to see LSU, get a loss at home. I really do.
Which will set up Ole Miss huge for eventual showdown with Georgia at home. Then after that, we have 2 other games that I do want to talk about. One I'll mention it's not really a big game, but it's more of a big game for the Heisman conversation. We talked about Boise State. Boise State plays at the end of the night. I'll be asleep for this game because it kicks off at 11 p.m. Eastern against Hawaii. Genty for Boise, just to put this in perspective, through 5 games, 95 carries, he's got 1,031 yards, which I sent this link out, I got to pull it up real quick. When you look at the last 3 running backs, Heisman Trophy winners, so you got Henry, you've got Ingram, and you've got Reggie Bush, what their stats were through the same 5 games, Henry had less than half. He had 570 in yards, 9 touchdowns. Genty's got 16 touchdowns. Ingram had 487 yards and 6 touchdowns, and Reggie Bush had 601 yards and 6 touchdowns. So my man's got double-digit touchdowns. He's got over 1,000 yards through 5 games. If he keeps it up, a man's winning the Heisman, or should. I really think it's just between him and Travis Hunter of who produces. But the Heisman Committee loves offensive stats, and especially if Boise State wins the Mountain West and is putting themselves into the playoff, Boise State's running back will get the nod for the Heisman.
100%. Just a little plug for Colorado as well. Did you see how much Travis Hunter said it would cost to keep him at Colorado for another year?
No.
$40 million.
All right. Well, we know that's not going to happen.
Oh, for sure. So, I mean, he already said that he's leaving after this season, but I just thought that was funny because they're like, 40? You mean 40,000? And he just laughed. So,
yeah. That's the other game I did want to bring up. Kansas State at Colorado.
Perfect.
Your thoughts?
Man, this is where I think we get to see the derailing of Colorado, just like they did last year. You start to play the bigger teams, the teams that have been ranked. I think this is where you start to see. I understand, like, you compare it to Nebraska. Nebraska is not even in the top 25 anymore, and they were able to take care of business against Colorado. I think just the pure size of the trenches, the issues that they had last year, are still relevant this year. Shadur's going to get hit. He's not going to have time to get the ball off. XYZ can't get the run game going. I think this is where we see the same downfall that Colorado had last season.
How do I want to attack Colorado? And I'll start it like this. When you go to the transfer portal, two things happen. You can get good players or you can get Florida State players. With the vast amount, the quantity of players that Colorado got, I would argue that you're getting a mixture of both. Have they found guys that were able to come in and play for them? Yes. But when you look at what Deion started with at Colorado, they don't have the depth.
Yes.
And that's what hurts them in the trenches, is that when they go outside of their starting defensive line and now you're having a sub in 2 and 3, and I'd argue that's exactly what's happening with Southern California right now, is that when they are having to rotate those defensive guys in and you're playing against those big corn-fed bubbas from Minnesota, guess who's winning? Them dudes. That's who's winning. And that's where the game turns, is late in the quarters, third and fourth quarter. Big Ten's always been about running. That's where those guys get run down. Colorado's only hope is being a Big 12 team, which is you got to put up a ton of points. For Colorado to win, they have to score, and they have to score in abundance. Kansas State has a good team. Like, I get that Kansas State's had one loss, but they're still ranked at 18. It wouldn't surprise me to see Colorado win. I can see both sides. I think that they have Travis Hunter, and it's really Kansas State. Kansas State, if they come in and play a C game and Colorado plays their A game, Colorado wins.
Yes.
If Kansas State comes in and plays their A game, Colorado's going to lose the game. And I would argue that's what it's going to be like for Colorado for the rest of the year, which is what you're alluding to. Because when I pull up their schedule and just take a look at Colorado of who they have yet to play, you sit back and yes, they have the big loss against Nebraska, 28-10. They beat Colorado State, they beat Baylor, they beat UCF, but they have to play Kansas State, at Arizona, play Cincinnati, at Texas Tech versus Utah, at Kansas versus Oklahoma State. It's a tough schedule, especially from a defensive side of the ball that you sit back and you look at. They gave up 31 points to Baylor, 21 points to UCF. It's showing signs that, hey, you probably don't have the defense to win. You're going to have to outscore them. I just don't see it out of Colorado. Last year's Colorado team had a little bit better wide receivers than this year. They're really relying on Travis Hunter. Mm-hmm. I'm in the same boat as you. That do I think that over the next few weeks, the hype train around Deion and Colorado is going to be pushed into the grave as it was last year? Yeah. But I wouldn't be shocked to see him hang around for a few more weeks.
Yeah, and looking at the stats, just purely for what kind of team that they are, Colorado, Shadur's already got 1,600 yards in the air. Their top running back has 117.
I'm looking
Like,
at that. Their second one's at 113. They've
yeah,
rushed for 403 yards total.
yeah, it's like, okay, well, so you're, 3/4 of the time you're passing, 1/4 you're running. Like, all right, that's going to be pretty easy to defend against. And then on the other side of the ball, to Kansas State's default, like their quarterback doesn't have great numbers. He's just barely above 50% and has yet to break 900 yards through the air with almost uh, 2 touchdowns to every 2 to 1 touchdown interception ratio. Like, not great numbers on that side of the ball either. So I think it could go either way. The good thing for Colorado is that they're playing in Boulder, but I truly don't think that matters.
It will matter from a media perspective, but it
Oh,
won't
for
matter
sure.
from a game.
Yeah, all the
like you're saying.
celebrities on the sidelines and everything else, just the show that Colorado is for sure.
And that really wraps up, the major week of college football with all the different games. I think it will definitely provide a lot more clarity of who teams are. But as we it's really been proven over the last few weeks, is I would argue you got about 3 to possibly 5 teams that are looking like the favorites, for the college football season, especially the playoffs. And outside of that, dude, it's chaos of who those other, 9 to possibly 11 teams are going to, or excuse me, 7 to 9 teams are going to be in the playoffs.
I'll tell you what, the one game that I do want to bring up that we didn't talk about, Iowa State, excuse me. Me and Maul both put them in our top 12.
Okay.
They're playing West Virginia at home. I know West Virginia got crap for, game day going out there for opening week against Penn State, and then Penn State just beats the brakes off of them. But West Virginia has been putting up 40 points a game ever since then. It's a Big 12 matchup. They're going to have to play there at night. I would be based on Iowa State. I mean, they played the 1 point game against Iowa. They better watch out. I would put them on upset alert because let's be honest, they've only beat the only team that's of note that Iowa State has beat outside of Iowa is Baylor, and Baylor got beat by Colorado. So I would say the level of competition Iowa State has had this season hasn't been there yet.
And West Virginia is bringing out them coal miner black uniforms too.
Yes.
So, and you look at West Virginia's schedule just to pull them up. They lose opening week to Penn State, which you sit back now and you go, okay, Penn State's pretty good for the Big Ten. Get a win versus, I think, Albany. They lose to Pitt, which I believe Pitt may be, Pitt's undefeated.
Yeah, Pitt's undefeated.
Pitt's 5-0. Then they win versus Kansas, win versus Oklahoma State, which was a really good victory at Oklahoma State.
That's what I'm saying.
And I'm with you. I can definitely see that catching them at home at night in West Virginia, probably the time that if there's going to be a good upset, I'm with you on that one. Yeah, give me the Mountaineers at home against Iowa State. You talked me into a believer.
Pat McAfee, put us on, man.
There you go. Outside of that, you got anything else?
No, man, I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week after the big week.